All right, so let's get started putting into practice what we just learned about and adding cookies and sessions to our current app. So first things first, as always, we have to install some packages, and the ones that we're using in this lesson are Passport, Passport-Local, Passport-Local-Mongoose. It's like some sort of weird game. And finally, Express-Session. Notice this is not Express-Sessions. We want the singular one. Because people are allowed to come up with names for their packages, and there's no sort of copywriting of any sort like that, you often end up with packages that are named really, really similarly. And only until you've installed it, you've required it, and it's not working, and you spend hours and hours debugging your code, you realize that you actually used the wrong package. So to avoid all of this heartache, just make sure that you've got the right one. And there's a really easy way of checking to make sure that you're using the right one. So let's say if I typed in Express-Session, you can see that over here there's a popularity score, there's a quality score, and there's a maintenance score. Now, if these bars are long, that means it's a popular, high quality, frequently maintained package, and that's usually what you want. And if you take a look at Express-Session, you can see that it gets over 500,000 downloads per week. Now, if we accidentally typed in Express-Sessions, you can see that all of those lines are a little bit shorter. And when you click on it, you see that it only has 600 weekly downloads. Some people probably genuinely want to use this package, but also there's probably people who have mistakenly installed it. So it's this one that we want, in addition to all of the others that we saw just now. And if you still got your server running, go ahead and stop it. And then we're going to npm install passport, passport-local, passport-local-mongoose, and finally express-session without the S. And let's hit enter, and it'll go through and install everything. And now we're ready to go ahead and incorporate it to our app.js. So first things first, we're going to rip out all of the parts where we were hashing and salting using bcrypt. So I'm going to delete it from here. And I'm also going to empty out my app.post login route and also the register one. So now both of our app.posts are empty, and we're going to incorporate hashing and salting and authentication using Passport and the packages that we've added just now. And the first package that we have to configure is Express-Session. It's really, really important that in the following steps, you do everything exactly in the order that I'm showing it to you and placing it in the right parts of the code. So take note of where I'm writing the code, because it's really, really important and it's really easy to mess up. So let's get started. First things first, let's require Express-Session. And I'm simply going to paste it in just to avoid making typos, which I make a lot of, but they say that recognizing you have a problem is the first step to solving those problems. And I'm going to change that var to a const because we are using ES version 6 in our code. Now, while I'm here, I'm going to also require the other packages that we installed, and the only ones that we actually need to create a constant for are Passport. So I'm going to require Passport, and then I'm going to require Passport local mongoose. And just check to make sure that you don't have any typos anywhere. And we don't actually need to require Passport local because it's going to be one of those dependencies that will be needed by Passport local mongoose, but we don't actually need to refer to it in the code. So we don't need to expose it explicitly by creating a constant and requiring the package. All right, so now that we're done, the next thing to do is to actually set up our session. And you can see that whenever we're referring to a method or a property that's from Express-Session, we're going to use the keyword session. So as always, when you're confused about what to do, head back to the documentation and it will be your guiding light. So we've got Express Session that we've already installed and required. So the next step is to actually use it. And in order to use it, we're going to use a bit of code where we say app.use and we're going to call session, and then we're going to pass in some options such as secret, resave, and save uninitialized. And we're going to place this code just above where we have mongoose.connect and just below all of the other app.uses. So right here. And it's important that you place your code here as well. So I'm going to write app.use and the package is called session. And then I'm going to open a set of parentheses and some curly braces. And then inside those curly braces is going to be a JavaScript object with a number of properties. One is going to be the secret, and this can be a long string of your choosing, and this is something that we're going to keep secret in our environment file. But first, let's get it working before we move it to the environment file. So I'm just going to put in a long sentence, our little secret, and I'll end it with a full stop. Now you don't have to, you can write any long string in here as long as you remember what it is and you use it consistently. All right, so let's add a comma and then let's add the next one. So we're going to set resave to false and we're going to set save uninitialized. Remember that it has to be a Z for the Americanized spelling. And we're going to set that to false as well. And then we can cap that off. Now, if you're wondering what all of those things I just said are actually doing, then be sure to read through the documentation and simply just hit Command F and search for it. And you can read through the documentation to see why we're choosing the options we are, and I'm basically following just the documentation's recommendations. Okay, so now that we've set up our session, the next thing to do is to initialize and start using Passport. And in order to use Passport, the first thing we have to do is to initialize it. So right below where we initialized our session with all of these options, we're going to again call app.use. And in this case, we're going to use something that comes along with Passport, and it's simply to initialize it. And this is a method that comes bundled with Passport and it sets up Passport for us to start using it for authentication. Now, the next line that we have to write is to tell our app to use Passport to also set up our session. So we're going to write passport.session and then we're going to add the parentheses and close that off. So we first tell our app to use the session package that we required up here. And then we set it up with some initial configuration. Next, we tell our app to use Passport and to initialize the Passport package and to also use Passport for dealing with the sessions. And if you want to know how I know to write these bits of code, be sure to check out the Passport documentation and especially under the configure section where they talk about Passport strategies and how to verify callbacks and how to work with Express-based applications, which is what we're doing. And this is where these bits of code comes from. So now that we've set up our app to use sessions and Passport for managing those sessions, the next thing to do is to set up our last package, Passport Local Mongoose. And we've already installed it, but in order to use it, we have to add it to our Mongoose schema as a plugin. So this is very similar to what we did when we covered encryption, when we used the Mongoose encryption package. So here we're going to tap into our user schema, and remember that this schema, in order for it to have a plugin, it has to be a Mongoose schema. It can't just be a standard JavaScript object. So make sure that your code still looks like this. And if you're confused about what I'm talking right now, make sure you take a look at the encryption lesson in this module. All right, so we've tapped into our user schema and we're going to add a plugin to it. And the plugin is, of course, Passport Local Mongoose. And that is what we're going to use to hash and salt our passwords and to save our users into our MongoDB database. It's going to do a lot of heavy lifting for us. So now that we've enabled it, let's go ahead and use it. So right below where we've created our user Mongoose model and set up Mongoose to use that schema that we created earlier on, we're ready to configure the very last thing, which is the Passport local configurations. And we're going to use exactly the same as what the documentation tells us to do, which is to create a strategy, which is going to be the local strategy to authenticate users using their username and password, and also to serialize and deserialize our user. Now, the serialize and deserialize is only necessary when we're using sessions. And what it does is when we tell it to serialize our user, it basically creates that fortune cookie and stuffs the message, namely our user's identifications, into the cookie. And then when we deserialize, it basically allows Passport to be able to crumble the cookie and discover the message inside, which is who this user is and all of their identification, so that we can authenticate them on our server. So normally, if you were just using Passport and Passport local, you would have to write a lot more code. But because we're using Passport local Mongoose, it's going to take care of a lot of that in between code for us. So all we need to do is just add these 3 lines of code right below where we create our new Mongoose model, and we're now ready to run our app. So let's go over and use NodeMon to run our app.js, making sure that your MongoDB server is still running. And some of you might notice this deprecation warning come up in the console. So what do we do when we come across a warning in the console? We copy it and we paste it into Google. So let's see what we get. Now, the first link we get is a link to an issue on the original Mongoose package. And you can see that people are getting exactly the same problem that we're experiencing. And some people have very helpfully told us how to fix it. All we need to do is call mongoose.set and then pass in this use create index option and set it to true. So whenever you're using third-party libraries, there's all sorts of things that can happen and give you these deprecation warnings or other types of warnings. It's really, really important to realize that you are not alone and other people have probably experienced what you're going through right now. So you have to try and find those people and see how they solved their problem. So let's go ahead and add that right below where we have our mongoose.connect. And we're going to say mongoose.set use create index, and let's set that to true. All right, now let's hit save, and the Mongoose server will restart, or you can write RS for restart, and you can see we no longer have that deprecation warning anymore. Okay, so we're pretty happy that our server is running without any warnings or errors. And if you're getting some problems in here, make sure that you firstly review where the code went and whether if you have any typos. So we first required 3 packages: express-session, passport, and passport local mongoose. And then we set up sessions to have a secret, set the resave option to false, and set the save uninitialized option to false as well. And then we initialized passport and we used passport to manage our sessions. And then we set up our user schema to use Passport Local Mongoose as a plugin. And finally, we used our Passport Local Mongoose to create a local login strategy and set up Passport to serialize and deserialize our user. And notice the order of the code here. It's really, really important that your code is placed in exactly the same places as I have on screen here. Because if, for example, you decided to set up sessions after you try to use the sessions to serialize and deserialize, it won't work. And similarly, if you try to use Passport to create a strategy, but you haven't initialized it, that also won't work. So this is why the order is important. So now that we are assuming that all the configuration is done and dusted, the next thing to do is to actually set up the register post route and the login post route. So let's tackle one at a time. And we're going to be using our Passport Local Mongoose package to do this. So in the documentation, in the example section, they show you how you might use this package to register your users. You would provide a username, which will in our case be an email, the user's password, and then there'll be a callback, which might return error if there were problems, or a user if everything went successfully. And then if there were no errors, then we can authenticate our user. So let's go ahead and do that in here. Now, we're first going to tap into the user model and we're going to call the method register on it. And this method comes from the Passport Local Mongoose package. And it's only because of the package that we can avoid creating our new user, saving our user, and interacting with Mongoose directly. Instead, we're going to be using the Passport Local Mongoose package as our middleman to handle all of that for us. So inside here, we're going to first add the username field, and we're going to pass in the information that gets passed over from our form. So it's the field that the user typed in for request.body.username. And this is going in as a JavaScript object, so with curly braces around it. The next part is we're going to pass in the password that the user wanted to register with. And this is going to be request.body.password. Now, for some reason, I keep accidentally typing passport instead of password, and I often mess those two up. So be sure that when you're typing, you don't make the same mistakes that I do. And it's request.body.password. Now, the very last thing that we have to add is a callback, which can potentially give us an error or give us the new registered user if everything was fine. And we're going to check to see if there were any errors. Then we're going to log those errors. And for the user, we're simply going to redirect them back to the same register page so that they can try again. Now, if there were no errors though, we're going to authenticate our user using Passport. So we're going to write passport.authenticate, and the type of authentication that we're performing is local. And then once we've authenticated them, we're going to again open a set of parentheses and we're going to pass in request, response, and a callback. And this callback is only triggered if the authentication was successful and we managed to successfully set up a cookie that saved their current logged in session. So we'll be able to check to see if they're logged in or not. So we can assume that if they end up in here, then we can safely redirect them to the secrets route. Now notice that previously we never had a secrets route because we always relied on res.rendering the secrets page either through register or through login. But in this case, because we're authenticating our user and setting up a logged in session for them, then even if they just go directly to the secrets page, they should automatically be able to view it if they are in fact still logged in. So that's why we need to create our secrets route. So I'm going to do that just below the register route up here, and I'm going to say app.get /secrets. And we're going to have our rec and res. And inside this callback is where we're going to check to see if the user is authenticated. And this is where we're relying on Passport and Session and Passport Local and Passport Local Mongoose to make sure that if a user is already logged in, then we should simply render the secrets page. But if they're not logged in, then we're going to redirect them to the login page. So here we're going to write if the request is authenticated, then in this case, we're going to res.render the secrets page, but, or else, i.e. the user is not authenticated, they're not logged in, then we should redirect them to the login route and force them to log in first before they can view this page. So let's go ahead and save our code and see if our registration section works. Making sure that our server is running without any issue, let's go over to localhost 3000 and let's try to register a new user. Let's call this new user at passportlocalmongoose.com, or you can call them whatever it is you like. But I just want to be able to identify them when we try to locate them on our database. So they're going to get a password that is 123456, and I'm going to click register. And now I get taken to the secrets page, which means that everything went through successfully. So now if we head over to Robo3T and let's view all the documents in our collection, you can see we have a brand new document here where the username is user at passportlocalmongoose, and we've got a salt and a hash. So this is what I meant when I said that the Passport Local Mongoose package will salt and hash our password for us automatically without us having to do anything about it. But in addition, when say I navigate away to, I don't know, the home page and I try to access the secrets page directly, it gets rendered straight away without me needing to log in again because I am already authenticated. And this is all thanks to the cookie that's got my session ID saved, and we can even see it if we go into our Chrome settings and we search for cookies, go to content settings, cookies, see all cookies and site data. And if we locate our local host, you can see that we've got one cookie that's saved right here. And you can see this is the content that gets created by that Express Sessions package. And it saves it inside this cookie called connect.sid. And it's set to expire when our browsing session ends. So that means that when I quit Chrome and I open it again, and I try to go back to localhost 3000/secrets, you can see that I am now no longer authenticated because that cookie got deleted by my browser because it's set to expire when I close down my browser. So now it's pushing me towards the login page because I am no longer authenticated. So I have to log back in order to be able to access the privileged areas. Now, at the moment, we haven't got our login routes set up yet, so let's go ahead and do that. So inside the app.post section for our login route, let's go ahead and create a new user. And this is going to be a new user created from our Mongoose model. And then this user is going to have its two properties, username and password set up. And the username is going to, of course, come from the request.body.username. And the password is going to be request.body.password. And this, of course, comes from the user when they fill in the login form right here. So now that we've created our new user, then we're going to use Passport to log in this user and authenticate them. And in order to do that, we're going to use a login function that Passport gives us, and it has to be called on the request object. So it has to be request.login, the user that we want to log in, and then we get a callback to see if there were any errors. But if there were none, then we're going to take the user to where they need to be. So going back to our code, we're going to call request.login, and remember this method comes from Passport. And we have to pass in the new user that comes from the login credentials that the user provided on our login page. And then we have a callback, which can potentially return an error if we were unable to find that user with that username in our database. So here is where we're going to check to see if there were any errors. And if there were, then we're simply going to log those errors in the console. But if there were no errors, then we're going to authenticate our user. So it means that they've successfully logged in, and we're going to call passport.authenticate. and we're going to use the local strategy. And you can see that I'm typing exactly the same code as I've got up here, which basically authenticates our user using their password and username. And if we've successfully authenticated them, then again, we're going to redirect them to the secrets route, where we of course check whether if they are indeed authenticated or not. So both when they've successfully registered and when they've successfully logged in using the right credentials, we're going to send a cookie and tell the browser to hold on to that cookie, because the cookie has a few pieces of information that tells our server about the user, namely that they are authorized to view any of the pages that require authentication. So let's go ahead and hit save and let's check it out. So we're going to go to the home page and we're going to click on login. So let's find that user that we signed up just now, user@passportlocalmongoose.com, and I'm going to put in their password of 123456 and click login. And now I get taken to the secret page. So it's working perfectly. Now there's just one last thing. We haven't yet defined a logout route, and when I click on that button, all I get is cannot get /logout, because that button is trying to hit up a route called /logout. And currently in our server, we don't have that route. So let's go and add it in. Let's add our app.get for the route that is logout, and add a callback, a rec and a res. And here is where we're going to essentially de-authenticate our user and end that user session. So how do we log out users? Well, let's take a look at the documentation. All we have to do is to call request.logout, and then that's it. So let's do request.logout, and then we're going to res.redirect them to the home page, or the root route, so that they go back to the home page once they've logged out. So let's save that and let's go back to our home page and log in our user again. 123456 and log in. And now if we click on log out, then you can see it takes us right back to our home page. And if we try to access the secrets page, it will force us to log in. Whereas if we are already logged in and we voluntarily say navigate to some website or close down the tab and try to go back to our localhost/secrets, our session is saved and we're still authenticated because of that cookie that we have on our browser. Now remember that when you update the code in your app.js and you hit save, that NodeMon will restart your server, right? And whenever your server gets restarted, your cookies gets deleted and your session gets restarted. So now if I try to go to secrets page, it redirects me to login because I'm no longer authenticated. That cookie gets deleted every time we restart the server. So now our website is able to remember when a user is already logged in, so that once they log in and they want to be able to access the parts of the website that require authentication, they don't have to keep logging back in. It's all saved in our cookie for that particular session. And the content of the cookie has a meaning to our server because it can check against it and know that the current user is already signed in. So we don't have to force them to sign in again when they try to access a part of the website that requires authentication. So cookies and sessions and Passport are not easy concepts to grasp. So I recommend watching this video a couple of times and also to be sure that you read through the Passport, Passport Local, the Passport Local Mongoose, and the Express session documentation. It's through reading all of these very, very long tomes, essentially, that you actually understand how to interact with it and why it is the code looks the way it does.